This movie is so fun. Just go see it. If you haven't already seen Project Hail Mary, I highly recommend it. It's not a perfect film, it's not the best film of all time, but it is very enjoyable. It is really good, and it gets a lot of things right. Now, I will say one of the most important one of those is just starting with a strong hook, opening on something interesting, which this movie does. I'm not going to go into spoilers really at all in this video. If you want spoilers, I'm sure you can find them out there. I just wanted to put this together because this movie does so well what has been missing from a lot of recent big blockbuster Hollywood productions. Yes, this is an expensive movie. It cost them $150 to $200 million to make, and I'm sure they're going to make all that money back and then some. I think this movie will be very successful. The theater I saw it in was essentially sold out, and it was a random standard screening due to timing and seat availability. You know, you got to go with what you're given in terms of your personal schedule. I couldn't see it in IMAX or Dolby Cinema or whatever special format was available, but I'm a firm believer in that none of those additions really make a movie better. They can make the experience more enjoyable, and I usually would prefer to see something in the highest quality available. But at the end of the day, if that doesn't work for your schedule, you should still be able to watch a movie in the standard version at the cinema and still enjoy it. And I'm thankful to say that is absolutely the case with Project Hail Mary. I saw it in a standard cinema. Theater was packed on a random, 5 o'clock showing. It was great. Enjoyed the whole thing. I bought in right at the beginning. And I will say, if you've seen The Martian, which is another movie adaptation of a book written by the same author, this feels very similar in terms of tone, pacing, style, and all that. But The Martian is a really good movie too, and I highly enjoy it. And I think Project Hail Mary just scratches that itch that a lot of us have been missing so recently with the big movies that come out. Either they're dull and boring and it's all just visual effects and all spectacle with no substance, or it's a chore to watch some art house indie film that you're just slugging through. I like the popcorn flicks. I like the blockbusters. I like stuff that's entertaining and fun and enjoyable and has stakes and tension and all the wonderful stuff you'd want out of a movie, out of a story, and this has it all. I'll also say this is refreshing in that it's very family friendly. In fact, I probably will go see it again, and I'll likely bring my kids, and they're 10 and 8. These are young kids. This is a PG-13 movie, but there's no blood, there's no gore, there's some scariness, there's some, takes you back, but nothing too intense. There's no language, there's no swearing, there's no excessive romance or anything like that. It's just a very family-friendly film. Even though it's PG-13, I would say this could probably be PG, and I'm surprised that it's not, even though it'll probably make more money because it's PG-13, right? It just feels more adult, even though I would say teens to preteens and even like older kids would get a lot out of this movie because it speaks to a lot of themes that I think resonate with just humans. Bravery, perseverance, friendship, sacrifice. These are kind of fundamentals in all of our, historical mythology from every culture on planet Earth. These are things we just cherish and value as human beings, and this story hits those points perfectly. Those themes are present throughout. You can't miss them. And the story, the plot itself, supports all of them. And you get some really charming moments. I will say Ryan Gosling is carrying this movie. It's all on his shoulders, and he does a phenomenal job. The guy is just charming. He's charismatic. You can't not want to watch him. And the way that it's presented, starting right off the bat, where you're already in space, it was one of my kind of fears going into it. I tried to avoid spoilers. I tried to not watch the trailers too closely, just so I can get a sense of like, okay, is this going to be a good film? Yeah, it looks like it'll be good. People are saying it's good. I'll go check it out. So I really didn't go in with any expectations. I didn't really know what I was getting into. Although I will say the biggest fear with anything like this is where you're starting at the beginning of the story and you're just waiting for them to go to space and to get on the mission and to just get through that whole first act of the setup. And thankfully, this movie skips all of that. I'm not sure if the book is written the same way. I would assume it probably is, because it's just a more satisfying way to tell the story. Start in the middle. We do a little bit of plot contrivance where he's got the amnesia coming out of stasis, coming out of the space coma, right? He doesn't really know where he's at or what's going on, so he has to get the story to himself and to us via flashback. which is awesome. That's great because we're starting in space. We're starting with what the reason we're all in the cinema in the first place is to see a space adventure. So I really do like that as far as story structure goes, because we're starting with an interesting reveal and then we get all the payoff via flashback, and we kind of tell that backstory in a way that's far more interesting than literally just starting at the beginning and going. And I will say, this movie is written to be fun, to be a space adventure, to have stakes, have consequences. We're talking end of the world kind of pressure, but it's still very fun and satisfying. This isn't a dismal, dark, bleak, depressing, tale of like, oh, the planet's dying and we're all dying and let's all be miserable together. No, this is actually fun and kind of lighthearted. I would say visually, this movie gets a lot right in terms of practical effects, filming, the real stuff, not CGI everything. Of course, that's going to be there. It is space after all, but the sets, a lot of that they built. And I think just visually, this movie taps back into some of those traditional types of lighting in Hollywood that we've been missing kind of a lot and at this level of production, where nowadays the big premium stuff, everything is softly lit, it's shot in the volume, or it just has the most beautiful lighting in every shot for every character. Every face is perfectly exposed and perfectly soft and even and kind of flat and dull and lifeless. And we've talked about that before. This movie is the opposite. There's a lot of shots in here where I was surprised at how harsh and kind of ugly the lighting was, but it's actually good because it feels appropriate to the scene, to the environment. Same for the color grading, same for the cameras and the lenses that they're using. Everything visually kind of matches the emotion that you'd want to evoke. And this is something that's been on my mind a lot recently. We think about emotion and story coming from the music, and that's a big part of it. The music in Project Hail Mary is actually very reminiscent of Interstellar. I assume they took heavy inspiration from that film because so much of the score to Project Hail Mary just reminds me of Interstellar. But regardless, visually, you get emotion as well. And I think it's one thing to see a style rise in prominence and popularity and become kind of the de facto standard for how movies are made, but I think that's a mistake. Really, you should be speaking visually the same way that you're thinking of the music. What emotion, what's appropriate for this type of story? And I think this movie gets that really, really right. The lighting is all very motivated and feels real and authentic to what is a fictional universe. They're not really on a spaceship, but they kind of are because of the set, and the lighting is appropriate. The camera angles, the movement, feels all very intentional and appropriate to this type of story. If you're telling something even more, comical and bright and airy and even more fun and vibrant, then the lighting should reflect that. And if you're telling an even darker, more depressing story, the lighting and the camera work should reflect that as well. And I think that's just what's kind of been missing for me lately, is the visuals not matching the story. And Project Hail Mary gets that right. Another thing this movie does really well, and I would probably chalk this up again to the book, because those stories just tend to be written with a little bit more craft, a little bit more love and attention to detail. But I'm assuming, because again, I haven't read the book, but we get a lot of exposition, as any sci-fi movie or story ought to. We need to explain a lot of what's going on, how the science works, what's at stake, who's doing what, where and when and why. That's all exposition. We need it explained to us, the audience, as well as to the characters in the scene, but beyond just exposition, because that gets really dry and boring and dull very fast. And there's a lot of movies that do this very poorly, where it's just exposition, telling, and this happens, and this happens, and this happens, and this happens. No, we actually get some participation in addition to the exposition. The characters in this movie do things that move the plot forward and play a meaningful part in the plot and how it unfolds. They're not just characters that are just randomly cobbled together and then things just happen to them. They're active participants in the story, which I really, really appreciate. And I think that's another thing that's been desperately lacking in a lot of modern day storytelling, is characters that just aren't really part of the plot itself. They're not making intentional choices. They're not making decisions that move things forward. They're not having discoveries and doing experiments and problem solving and figuring it out themselves. It's just a bunch of stuff happening to them. So I'm glad to see that Project Hail Mary strikes that perfect balance between the two. There is a lot of exposition. There's a lot of, here's how the science works. But then there's a lot of participation from the characters themselves, doing things, playing an active part, moving the plot forward. This is really satisfying because now the characters feel like proactive agents in their own story, as opposed to just reactive agents, oh gosh, this is happening. Okay, we got to do something. And then they just move on to the next scene. And I will say, as far as Ryan Gosling goes, he nails it. He plays a character who is very likable, but is still flawed in very deep, meaningful ways that impact the story. Again, I think this is why it's so valuable to do some of these movies based on works written by authors. If you're going to spend the time to sit down and write a book, chances are you're really going to think about all those aspects, especially a good book, right? If it's highly regarded, if it's award-winning, if it's got a big fan base already, chances are it's a pretty good story that's worth telling. And as long as the adaptation is done properly, meaning they actually cherish what the author did, which I will say, I love seeing that Project Hail Mary. A lot of the marketing is from the author of the book saying, if you're a fan of the book, go watch this movie. That is like the highest praise you could ever get. The author of the original work praising the adaptation. So often that's missed. A book or a franchise gets licensed and then they throw away the author like, yeah, whatever, get out of here. We're just going to do it our own way. Completely missing the point of why you would even want to license or acquire the property in the first place. So that's really, really nice to see that this is, vetted and tested and promoted by the author of the original work. I just love to see it, and I wish we got more of that. Hopefully that's something that can stay in the future. Proper adaptations that keep the most important parts of that original work, that factor in the author's input and their intent, because it just makes such a big difference. So we have our main protagonist, Grace, and like I said, he's flawed. He's not perfect, which is another thing that is so satisfying when it comes to storytelling. Yes, make your smart character, make your heroic character, make your brave character, whatever the archetypes are, whatever the personality is, give them some traits, give them some fundamental characteristics about their personality and who they are. But also, you got to remember, human beings, a lot of times our strengths are our weaknesses at the same time, kind of that duality of man, if you will, where just because you're really good at something, that can also mean you're really bad at other things, or it comes with a cost. And this character, the protagonist, is the exact same way, and I love to see that. I think that makes characters feel really rich and deep and vibrant, like they are real people. Again, yes, we all know these aren't real people. This is not like based on a true story or anything like that. But when you're buying into fiction, when you're listening to a story, you want it to feel relatable in that you could imagine things like this, or you yourself might act in a similar way, or you know somebody who would act similarly. And I think that level, that attention to detail when it comes to characters is very satisfying when you're watching a story unfold. Like I said, this movie isn't perfect. It's not 10 out of 10 best movie of all time. I don't even know if it's really award-winning. We'll see, is it that level? But I do know that it's highly enjoyable. This is entertainment, the stuff you want to see on the big screen. I'm going to go see it again. I enjoyed it that much, to the point where I would tell other people, this is a movie, this is a story you should go see. You should go watch it on the big screen, go to the theater, have a good time, get some popcorn, have a soda, whatever it is you like to do, and enjoy a really, really good movie. You don't need to see it in IMAX. You don't need to see it in Dolby. I think you can have a great experience at the standard cinema like I did. But also, if you have the opportunity, go see it on the best screen possible, because it's probably worth it. I really liked it. I highly recommend it, and I just wanted to share.